Good afternoon. It's Friday the 29th of May, 2026, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm host Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio once again is Patrick Henningsen. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
It's great to be with you, Mike.
And by video link, we're joined by Basil, Valentine. And later in the programme, we're going to be joined by former Labour MP Chris Williamson to discuss Tony Blair's recent intervention in British politics. And we'll be covering the latest on Peter Mandelson's international connections and the UK ramping up for drones in Ukraine and the continuing ramping up of war production more generally, in fact, in Europe. But we're going to begin once again today with digital ID because, as everyone will know, the public consultation into the Starmer government's digital ID scheme has concluded, and they're now evaluating the contributions. But what you may not know is this policy is going to make use of, or at least the next stage of it, is going to make use of a mechanism long warned about by Ben Rubin in particular on this programme, and that is the Citizens' Assembly. Now, in this case, they're calling it the People's Panel. It will have 120 participants, and the Cabinet Office has now published the terms of reference for the Oversight Group, which will steer the so-called People's Panel on Digital ID. Now, the end point of this is absolutely set already because the terms of reference begin with the same text that they had on the consultation page, which basically said the government intends to introduce a digital ID system by the end of this Parliament. Now, that's not considering, that's intending. It intends, it will. That decision's already been made. So the question is, what is the People's Panel going to do? Well, first of all, as I say, 120 people. These are going to be chosen apparently by postcode lottery, and they are not, as we have just made the point, being asked whether Britain should have a digital ID. They are being asked how it should be built and how it should be rolled out. So let's first of all bring on the chair, because that is Baroness Armstrong of Hilltop. The oversight group that's going to be steering this, in their document, say that digital ID is modern, convenient, secure. It puts people in control of their data. It's inclusive. It comes without upfront charges. And twice in the document, it talks about making people's lives easier. There's no mentions of risks, of drawbacks, of controversy. And in that sense, Patrick, it seems quite similar to the jabs during COVID. We give you all the alleged benefits of it, even though you don't really want it. And they say nothing about the potential side effects.
Yeah, or the NHS track and trace app, which we didn't even get anyway. But there you are.
Well, indeed. Now, this panel is supposed to make sure that the process is, as they put it, robust, rigorous, and transparent. But what's fascinating about it is that everybody that's on the steering committee, if you want to call it that, is bound by the Official Secrets Act. Now, this is because the government is saying that there may be exposed information which is not yet in the public domain, but nonetheless, they're not allowed to talk about, they're not allowed to share minutes of what they talk about. They're not allowed to talk about their internal conversations. It's quite incredible. So no transparency at all there.
What could there be in the digital ID conversation that would fall under top secret? I don't understand. Isn't it just about making our lives that much more convenient?
Well, I would suggest that they made such a mess of the initial announcement and they got such a pushback on that initial announcement, the idea that it was going to be mandatory and so on. They're now absolutely panicking about anything coming out, which is going to give any momentum to the opposition.
So anything embarrassing is a threat to, quote, national security. I get
precisely.
It. Thank you for clearing that up.
Absolutely. Now, so as I say, Official Secrets Act, disclosure, what they said was a disclosure outside the agreed remit could mean criminal prosecutions. Recordings are deleted after the project. Minutes are only shared with the members of the committee. Now, then we have the oversight group itself. Now, I'm not going to highlight everybody that's on this, but just a few, because these names some people may be familiar with from previous UK column newses. So we've got Jenny Tennyson of Connected by Data, Claudia Chalice of Democracy Next, Alistair Carmichael, who's a Liberal Democrat MP, Matt Downey, the Chief Executive of Crisis. So this is sortition in action. And to highlight the dangers of this, I'm going to play a short clip from Yes Minister here because, basically what we saw when we went to the Occupy, we've talked about this before, we went to the Occupy protests in St. Paul's years ago.
Oh, yeah, 2011?
In 2011, sort of time to 2011, 2012, whatever that was. And we saw these types of citizens' assemblies in their embryonic form. And we saw how the steering committee actually steered the conversation using such things as Delphi technique. But there's even more basic ways to steer this. This just gives a short example of how it might work.
This nice young lady comes up to you. Obviously, you want to create a good impression. You don't want to look a fool, do you?
No.
No. So she starts asking you some questions. Mr. Woolley, are you worried about the number of young people without jobs?
Yes.
Are you worried about the rise in crime among teenagers?
Yes.
Do you think there's a lack of discipline in our comprehensive schools?
Yes.
Do you think young people welcome some authority and leadership in their lives?
Yes.
Do you think they respond to a challenge?
Yes.
Would you be in favor of reintroducing national service?
Oh, well, I suppose I might.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Of course you would, Bernard. After all you've told you can't say no to that. So, they don't mention the first 5 questions and they publish the last one.
Is that really what they do?
Well, not the reputable ones, no, but there aren't many of those. So, alternatively, the young lady can get the opposite result. How? Mr. Woolley, are you worried about the danger of war?
Yes.
Are you worried about the growth of armaments?
Yes.
Do you think there's a danger in giving young people guns and teaching them how to kill?
Yes.
Do you think it's wrong to force people to take up arms against their will?
Yes.
Would you oppose the reintroduction of national service?
Yes.
Right. A humorous example of how easy it is to steer people to give the answer that you want. So anyway, to summarize this, 120-member People's Panel can't reject digital ID because that decision's already made. It deliberates on a brief that the government frames with materials the government controls, reported by a contractor the government appoints. I didn't mention that. That's Ipsos, by the way, and overseen by a group that the government chairs. And so I'm going to leave it to you, the audience, to decide if this is likely to produce an outcome anyone could support other than the government. But no matter what comes out of it, it's going to be framed as the voice of the people.
Yeah, it's the whole point of this setup, Mike, as you rightly said, from the embryonic stage, framing the argument, then steering the conversation, and then avoiding any uncomfortable questions.
Right.
And to reinforce a consensus, give the impression of a consensus. The thing that concerns me is that they won't be keeping public records, video footage of the consultations, and only certain transcripts. So why not everything? Why not preserve it all? Because isn't this important? Isn't this a part of history?
So just to clarify, the terms of reference are talking about the deliberations of the steering committee itself. Now, what happens with the sessions that they run with the 120 people, that remains to be seen. But that I'm talking about the actual conversations that steering committee is having internally. We get no oversight of that.
Should be public record.
Should be public record.
That would be fascinating to watch, wouldn't it?
Yes.
I certainly would pay. I'd pay for the privilege, actually. I'd pay a tenner to download it and watch it on a secure link.
Indeed. Okay, Patrick, let's move on then to Peter Mandelson.
Mandy. Well, Mandy is back in the news. Just get your head around this one. Revealed Mandelson's vetting warned ties to senior figures of China, Russia, and lastly, Israel, of course. But some people will be focusing on the others, but it's somehow missing the mention of this man, but that's expected here. Let's take a look at some of the details here. Mandelson's links to former head of Israeli military intelligence, Tamir Hyman, including bi-monthly discussions, debriefings, I would say, flagged by the United Kingdom Security Vetting Agency here. Isn't that interesting? It was flagged. Well, what happened after that? There's Jeff, not to be left out. What happened after that? This is what happened. The agency concluded that Mandelson posed a, quote, high overall concern, and its recommendation to the Foreign Office was that his developing vetting clearance should be denied. But that's not exactly what happened here. Let's take a look. After being briefed on the contents of Mandelson's UKSV summary file, then Foreign Office Permanent Secretary Ollie Robbins granted Mandelson security clearance anyway. So the Foreign Office pretty much overrode the recommendations of the vetting agency. Isn't that something? So again, no mention of Jeff in there, but let's take a look at what the shadow Foreign Secretary for Israel, I mean, the Conservative Party, Priti Patel, she's a very charming smile, as we know, Priti weighs in here. These shocking revelations underline just how reckless Keir Starmer's decision to appoint Peter Mandelson was. A man with these links to Russia and China should never have been handed one of our most sensitive diplomatic posts. So no mention of Israel. Surprise, surprise. She can't bring herself to even mention the great
word,
the only democracy in the Middle East, our greatest friend and ally. So there we are. Mandelson is incredible.
Yes,
he just keeps giving, doesn't he?
Absolutely. Well, look, let's move on to what's going on globally, conflict-wise, and well, what are we saying here, Patrick? 3 wars.
Well, we'll give you a summary, a very quick round summary of what's going on these 3 flashpoints here. Of course, Iran, Ukraine, and this one is developing. That is the imminent invasion of Cuba. All signals are pointing that direction. I know some people might be surprised to hear that, but let's go to Iran. So what's the latest in Iran? Where are we with this deal, this peace deal that everybody has been talking about for a long time, but hasn't materialized? U.S.-Israeli peace plan. Well, here's the latest. There's the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. Israel pressuring Trump to abandon Iran negotiations and assassinate Iran's lead negotiator, Ghalibaf. Okay. Next, Israel pushing Trump to restart military strikes targeting Iran's oil and energy infrastructure to trigger regime change in Tehran. So they're making progress, as you can see. I mean, really pushing things forward, aren't they? It's pretty impressive, but not to be outdone. Trump now threatens to blow up the country of Oman. I know it sounds insane, but here is the President of the United States in his own words.
No, the strait's going to be open to everybody.
And who would control it?
It's international waters. Nobody's going to control it. We're going to watch over it. We'll watch over it, but nobody's going to control it. That's part of the negotiation that we have. They would like to control it. Nobody's going to control it. It's international waters, and Oman will behave just like everybody else, so we'll have to blow them up. They understand that. They'll be fine.
Nothing extreme there, of course. It's just another day in life. So threatening to, a U.S. ally, by the way, Oman, has always had very good relations with the United States government, or at least previous administrations. But of course, that's all really up for grabs right now. So, but what was he talking about? International waters. Just a little legal lesson here for Donald Trump and his cohort. The extension of territorial waters in the Straits of Hormuz. Actually, after the UN Convention for the Law of the Seas, both Oman and Iran extended their territorial waters, so there are no international waters in the Straits of Hormuz. Those are Iranian and Omani territorial waters, not international, which means they have a right to exercise control over that waterway, especially during a time of war. I can't remember who started this war to begin with. That's
it's so long ago, I can't remember.
It wasn't Iran, was it?
No.
I think it might have been the U.S. and Israel. So they really don't have much to complain about, but that is how the international law looks. So you're seeing all of this waxing lyrical about international law, and this is a violation of this and that. No, it's not. Iran is fully within their rights under international law. So if you want to rewrite international law, be my guest. You're going to have to plan to have a major convention on this. That could take a couple years. Who knows? That process might outlast Trump's presidency. So, those are the facts, folks. And we put a link in the show notes that will take you to that, plus an explanation of the Persian Gulf Straits Authority, which is an agency set up by Iran to now administer traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. And that's creating all sorts of problems. Now, Trump's not done there. The argument still keeps coming. And you see them, they're all repeating the same talking point that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. Well, we've established many times on this program that they don't have one. They're not developing one, haven't been even considering one since 2003. That's a while ago, isn't it? 2003, according to U.S. intelligence assessments. So that's not Patrick Henningsen of the UK column saying that. That's the CIA and the entire U.S. intelligence community. So, but Donald Trump has other sources in Tel Aviv. Listen to the president here explaining his version of history.
If we didn't hit them with the B-2 bombers, Iran would have had a nuclear weapon within 2 weeks from that date because they were ready to go. And if they had a nuclear weapon, it would have been used already. It also would have been used had I not terminated the Obama deal, the Iran nuclear deal, as we call it. That was in my first term. Had I not terminated that, they would have had a nuclear weapon a long time ago. I would say it was a guarantee that it would have been used. And it would have blown up Israel. It would have blown up the entire Middle East. And that's never going to happen.
So let me just get the logic straight. So removing the nuclear deal that constrained Iran, because Trump did that, he saved Iran from building a bomb.
Yes.
That's sort of the logic, isn't it?
Seems to be, yeah.
So that deal's been, 9 years?
Mm-hmm.
How come they didn't develop a bomb in 9 years then if Trump withdrew from the nuclear deal in, I believe it was May 2018? So 8 years, eight
Right.
years. So I guess 2 weeks. He says 2 weeks, but I'm saying 8 years and nothing. So I think my argument's a little more credible than the U.S. president there, but hey. So anyway, just on that note, Mike, Iran has rebuilt the South Pars gas field. So they're back to normal production. That was quick, wasn't it? Very impressive engineering by the Iranians. And the Iranians have hit the Kuwaiti base, the U.S. base in Kuwait, as a retaliation for the U.S. strikes from last weekend. So things have developed there. So maybe that's why Israel wants to resume the strikes, because Iran has already rebuilt the damage of the South Pars gas field. I don't know. It's just a shot in the dark on my part here. But this is an interesting takeaway. U.S. munitions depleted by the Iran war will take years to restore. Analysis finds here the source for this is the Center for Strategic International Studies, approximately 3 years, they're saying. So 3 years to rearm and to restock. So another brilliant move by Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, the mercurial Secretary of War. Is impressive performance.
So, of course, Britain and the EU have largely depleted their munitions in Ukraine as well. So where is the West with their war policy at the moment?
Well, they're telling their enemies it's a good time to push forward against NATO and the U.S. So maybe, who knows? Well, listen, so it's a big failure. Also, record aircraft losses. It's come in, I think 43 aircraft have been lost during this conflict, plus another, I think, a dozen during the Yemen conflict. So this record losses. The U.S. have not lost this many air assets in any war, probably since the Second World War. So this is record-breaking stuff. So I'd like to see the midterm performance review for the esteemed Secretary of War. That would be interesting. Well, I don't know if we'll get to see that or not. But so that's where things are going to lie there. Now on to Ukraine. And we have, so the next blow, and again, we're showing the banned website RT here, very dangerous content. Of course, we don't want the Western public to know what the Russians are saying, especially if it involves war. We just want to think it dropped out of the sky and Russia's just lashing out. No, Russia's warning here. Moscow, the next blow will be more painful. Russian experts are signaling something bigger than retaliation. This is following the Ukrainian drone strike against the college dormitory at Belsk in Luhansk. So obviously this is ratcheting up the entire escalation ladder on this here. Moscow's cup of resilience has overflowed. This is according to the foreign ministry. So their patience, not to mistake Russia's patience with their sort of inability to fight, which is generally what NATO does on these sort of situations consistently. And this is why we're in the situation we're in here. Now, you hear a lot of this talk, Mike, about NATO, U.S. pulling back out of NATO. We hear that constantly. They're threatening to pull out. They're going to withdraw. They're not going to support Europe. But at the same time, you see this. Russia warns against sending more troops to its border. 5,000 U.S. troops to Poland is scheduled. So I guess they're really not scaling back.
Well, we're going to
the
talk
NATO,
about that in just a second. So,
it's a shell game.
Yes.
It's a bit of a shell game. So we're just pointing out some of the inconsistencies on that. But suffice to say, last thing is the situation is very serious. If people, if we in the Western public don't know what Moscow's saying, the Moscow's saying, we're going to hit the source of attacks against us, even if those are manufacturers of drones in Europe or Germany or U.S. bases in Germany or German bases or Polish bases. That's a serious thing. That could lead to an escalation in a wider war. Wouldn't you want to know what the Russian Foreign Ministry is saying? Why do we block Russian websites? Because they want to keep the West in a little information bubble, a ghettoized information space. So when Russia does strike those targets after warning for 2 straight years, stop hitting us with your drones and missiles from Ukraine, NATO missiles and NATO drones, we'll just be here haplessly in the West saying, oh my God, look at Putin's aggression. And the warnings have been there consistently for 2 years. That's why they censor Russian media in the West. They don't want you to know what's coming. They just want you to react to their narrative.
And so it's interesting you mentioned that. So let's talk about what the Russian Foreign Ministry is saying. Let's bring it on screen because what they're saying is this. In the early hours of May the 22nd, the Nazi Kiev regime carried out a bloody terrorist attack on the academic building and dormitory of the Lugansk State Pedagogical University College at Starobletsk. They used 4 fixed-wing UAVs, that's, of course, drones. And so that's what the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs was saying a week ago. Now, since then, many voices, including Putin, have echoed that statement with a particular focus on the terrorism claim. Now, I want to remind everyone that attacks like this are being carried out using drones paid for by us, by British taxpayers. So if you just remember this from last month, the UK has announced the biggest ever drone package for Ukraine, delivering at least 120,000 drones for Ukraine this year and driving growth and jobs across the UK. So it's great because people in the UK can earn lots of money based on the deaths of people in Ukraine and Russia. The new package, they said at that time, is the largest of its kind ever supplied by the UK, will include thousands of long-range strike drones, intelligence reconnaissance drones, logistics drones, and maritime capabilities, which are all battle-proven on Ukraine's front line. And they said the delivery of these new drones to Ukraine have already started this month. So that this commitment that I've just talked about was the result of a January 16th, 2025 agreement signed by Prime Minister Keir Starmer at the time and Zelensky. That was entitled the Agreement of a 100-Year Partnership. It established a framework to, as they described it, deepen cooperation, and especially in defense and security. So it's taken them a year to get to the point of actually rolling this out. We're seeing the consequences of it. And of course, as we talked about in last week's program, Patrick, the increasing use of these drones and the increasing apparent willingness by Russia to retaliate is resulting in exactly the kinds of narratives in the mainstream press, basically saying, because today, of course, we've got this news of a drone falling on a building in Romania, which they're claiming is a Russian drone. I'm highly skeptical about that. But they're already saying that Russia is stepping across a line at this point. And so the determination to make sure that we are, increasing the pressure on this whole situation. Now, Britain and Ukraine, as a result of these agreements, has set up joint drone companies such as this one. This is, I'm not even going to try to pronounce it actually.
Ukrspec Systems.
Ukrspec Systems. This has opened a new defense plant in the UK. By that, I mean a war plant. They manufacture hundreds of drones monthly for the Ukrainian Defense Forces. And then we have this lot. This is Skyton, or Skyton. I'm not quite sure again how to pronounce that. And they work in collaboration with a British company called Prevail Partners. And this is, again, creating Prevail Partners, by the way, is a defense and intelligence firm founded by UK Special Forces. They've created a new entity called Skyton Prevail Solutions. And this joint venture is going to produce Ukrainian-designed drones such as Raybird 3. But we're also paying for at least a dozen other types of drones, including Windracers Ultra, which is a heavy lift, long range drone. Altus 600 meter and 700M, a loitering drone, as it's described, supplied by Endural in the UK. We talked about them in the past to monitor areas and strike forces. The Dart 250, which is a one-way attack electronics warfare drone. The Techiver AR3, which is a reconnaissance drone, quotes, utilized for intelligence gathering and surveillance. Then there's the Project Octopus drone to hunt and destroy enemy drones, amongst a whole host of other drones. It is quite incredible just how much money belonging to us as taxpayers is being spent on these killing machines.
Yeah, and you think it's harmless, or we have a right to hit Russian targets through our proxy Ukraine. That's what the West tells themselves. We have a right to do that because of Russia's aggression in February 2022. That is just a fallacious argument. It's dangerous as well, because the future of warfare, in this case, isn't going to really begin and end with drones. It's going to end with missiles. It's going to end with Kinshals, Oresniks, nuclear-armed missiles, intermediate range ballistic missiles coming from Russia hitting European targets. Why not just avoid all of that and come to some kind of political settlement? No, because we have a military industrial complex that we want to feed and grow so that everybody can get filthy rich. Meanwhile, we're pushing everybody, Europe, to the precipice of a conflict where there is no coming back once you cross that line.
I'll just correct that slightly. It's not everyone that's going to get filthy rich. It's only the Epstein class. The rest of us might continue in our minimum wage jobs.
Yeah, those at the ground level of the IPO of all these wonderful defense companies like Anduril,
absolutely,
and Palantir and so forth. So very much AI driven. Now, the third leg of these three conflicts here that we want to warn about, of course, is Cuba. We'll bring this up on screen right here. And we just found out an interesting report here, thanks to the Independent. They probably did one of the best summaries on this, UK Independent. Military has spent months building up ships and personnel in the Caribbean and is ready for an invasion of Cuba. So I think it's now beyond speculation. This is the plan. Donald Trump thinks he can get an easy win. He's found somebody he can pick on that won't really be able to hit back in a serious way. Well, we'll see what kind of resistance Cuba puts up. But this war is on the cards now. And a lot of people will support this. They'll say, well, it's a communist country, therefore they deserve to be invaded. And if there's any collateral damage, well, just so be it. It's the evil commies. So therefore, we're somehow justified in doing that. So forget about international law, of course, or the UN Charter. So that's happening. And just on the media front, I just want to show you a classic example here of real disinformation brought to you by Rupert Murdoch's The Times. Notice the headline: Trump war games U.S. response to chaos in Cuba. So the implication here is that Cuba's in chaos. They're in economic chaos because they can't manage their economy. No mention of sanctions, no mention of the embargo, killing any gas or fuel deliveries into that country. So I think this is just 100% unadulterated propaganda. And so we're going to say that's exactly what it is. So this is how our mainstream media, that's how they operate in advance of a war. They're prepping the public with this type of skull plugging that they do so well to give you just a really distorted view of reality, to say, well, it's sort of, yeah, this is inevitable. We just get ready for the war. So there's that one. We'll be reporting on more of that in the future.
So a few minutes ago, Patrick was asking how many troops is Trump deploying in Europe? Well, look, since around 2015, UK columns have been warning about the militarization of Europe, and particularly the creation of a defense union, which will put command and control of member states' militaries in the hands of Ursula von der Leyen, or whoever the next great dictator will be. Now, we've also been warning that the rhetoric coming from the United States under Donald Trump is a key driver. Now, it's a key driver that has been used by Britain, actually mainly to propagandize the Europeans to push for this, and it has been pretty successful over particularly the last year, 18 months. But the pressure from Trump is continuing, as reported by Fox News here. They're basically saying that the US has told allies it will gradually scale down the number of strategic bombers, fighter jets, drones, and submarines and warships dedicated to NATO for redeployment elsewhere. Well, this is part of the plan that we've been talking about for quite some time. It's been stated multiple times by multiple people within or connected to the US administration that the US wants to refocus, aside from Iran, on the South China Sea, and they want the European Union to look after the European theatre. So this announcement was made as part of a closed-door meeting of NATO policy directors last Friday by Pentagon advisor Alexander Wallace-Green. And that's according to two NATO diplomats who were offered anonymity to speak freely. But anyway, the trouble is that Trump is inconsistent in his messaging because, and Patrick, this is what Patrick was alluding to earlier, because he announced that he would pull 5,000 troops out of Germany, which later turned out to include 4,000 troops coming out of Poland, before changing his mind and saying he would deploy an additional 5,000 troops to Poland. But nonetheless, the apparent inconsistencies are working. They completely destabilize the EU, and they don't know which way is up. So they are reacting in exactly the way they're supposed to, by rearming at a rate that hasn't been really seen since the Second World War. And of course, it's all being paid for with deficit spending, Patrick.
Well, look, when they say dedicated to NATO, bombers, fighter jets, it's not dedicated to NATO. It's dedicated to the United States extension of their power, because they run NATO. They decide what actions NATO is going to take. NATO is just a fig leaf. It's a protection racket for the military, U.S.-led military-industrial complex, and it's a way for the U.S. to flex its muscles globally without having to go by Congress, for instance. Is able to do it through multilateral institutions. As we've said before, that's how the U.S. has exercised power since the Second World War, through controlling and working through multilateral institutions like NATO. That is a U.S. imperial organ, basically. So again, and the Europeans would feel a lot less confident to be talking tough and doing the sort of rhetoric they're doing if the United States was not backing them up or standing behind them. And that's the whole point. This is all theater that we are watching right now.
Absolutely. But of course, there are more than European and United States, European countries in the United States in NATO. So it's maybe no surprise then that more and more bilateral agreements continue to be created. So Poland and Canada on Wednesday signed an agreement to expand military and industrial cooperation under the European Union's SAFE, that's SAFE, the acronym, rearmament program. And of course, the usual rhetoric, pledging closer defense ties through projects including weapons procurement and joint Arctic drills. But while their defense minister was in Ottawa, the Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, was in London, where he and Keir Starmer, this was on Wednesday, signed a new defense and security treaty aimed at strengthening military cooperation and countering growing security threats across Europe. Again, that's their language. And speaking before he left London, Tusk said that Poland wanted to bring relations to Britain to the highest possible level, with particular focus, again, on security and defense against Russia. And that was absolutely Tusk's focus, Russia, of course, which is never far from his mind.
And wait a minute, Mike, all of these security threats against Europe are all a direct result of U.S. covert activity and military interventions. Isn't that interesting? The U.S. makes the problem, and then they sort of control the reaction and supply the solution. And the Europeans are completely happy to be on board with that whole sham, basically. So.
Absolutely. Okay, let's have a quick advertising break here. If you like what the UK Column does, you'd like to support us, head over to the website. Join us as a member if you possibly can. Your membership absolutely is what keeps us going. So thank you very much to everybody that is contributing that way. If you can't support us financially, do share this program and anything else that you like, because that will help us defeat the censorship regime, hopefully. Don't forget that another way to defeat the censorship regime is to pick up a copy of the Column, our new magazine. That's available on the UK Column shop. And if you'd like to join us for the 20th anniversary on location event in September, please do. That tickets are on sale for that right now. Okay, so germ warfare tonight then is going to be a repeat, I'm afraid, because germ had technical issues. So Brian will be speaking to germ again tonight, back to normal on Monday, but join us at 7 for that. At 9, Carl Zah is suggesting that China is winning the narrative and the West knows it. Well, let's see whether that's the case or not at 9 p.m. tonight. And we'd like to just highlight this article on the UK Column website, Trump's war on Native America in the shadow of Hormuz. So he's looking at what Trump is doing with the the nations in the United States. So have a read at that if you can. Basil, let me welcome you to the program. And of course, earlier in the week, Tony Blair decided that he had been silent for too long, unfortunately.
Yes, that's right, Mike. We stopped making Hammer horror films in Britain in the mid-1970s, but who needs them when we've got a ghoulish zombie of our own ready to come out of the crypt at the drop of a hat? Tony Blair writing a 5,500-word essay this week calling for, of course, more war, more billionaires, more AI, more power to the tech bros, less for welfare, less for the health service. It really is a typically abysmal intervention. We're all rather sick of it. Tony Blair's cure is the disease, says Owen Jones, and he's absolutely right. Quite apart from the fact, of course, that Blair should be in The Hague. He should be in the dock. He has committed the ultimate crime of an unprovoked war, and the cure he's offering, more neoliberalism, is, as Owen Jones says, actually the cause of our disease, the reason why the far right is so popular, because British politics has failed ordinary people over the last, I would say, 45 years, since that terrible day in May 1979, when Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister of Britain. The Morning Star reporting an almost infinite capacity for self-delusion. Look in the mirror, Blair. And Ian Dunt in The Independent writing, Tony Blair's downfall is complete. What a sad, irrelevant end. If only, unfortunately, he still gets platformed. Nick Robinson giving him a softball interview on the BBC Today programme this week. And generally, as a former Prime Minister, regardless of the crimes he's committed or indeed the destruction he wrought on the Labour Party, his voice is still amplified way beyond, in my view, its importance or relevance. All he's done since leaving office is line his own pockets. And here, finally, we have Stop the War Coalition and indeed Chris Nineham of Defend Our Juries. When will we slay the ghost of Tony Blair? Not just Blair himself, but his ideas. Because, of course, that neoliberalism remains very much in charge of the Labour Party, as indeed it does all the parties that will be contesting the Makerfield by-election, with the possible exception of the Greens, although they've now decided to run only really a paper candidate. Now, joining me to dissect Blair's latest foray back into the world of politics is former Labour MP for Derby, now the Deputy Leader of the Workers' Party of Britain, Chris Williamson. Welcome to the programme, Chris.
Good to be here, Basil.
Now, you published an excellent essay on Facebook pointing out how Blair's legacy is one of, just sort of corruption and greed, a continuation of Thatcherism. And what the Labour Party really needs is a return to the politics that brought us an economy where you could buy a house for 3 times the average salary. The 1970s have been decried, but in fact, in many ways, all sorts of metrics, living standards were better then than they are now, weren't they, Chris?
That's absolutely right, Basil. Then, if you can hear me, I seem to have lost you from my headphones here.
Yeah,
but,
we can hear you fine.
You can hear
me.
You're absolutely right. Yes, I mean, the 1970s was indeed a good period for ordinary working class people because, as you'd say, living standards were better. There was access to good quality, secure employment for millions of people. But this obsession with neoliberalism and globalization that Tony Blair seems to be trying to promote once again has actually been disastrous for the working class in Britain and has seen jobs which were previously available to people being offshored to other countries where the companies can extract bigger profits than they were able to do in this country. So if we remember after the war, I mean, places like Japan were building British vehicles under license. I mean, Britain led the world in manufacturing. we had a very vibrant car and motorcycle industry, shipbuilding industry. Manufacturing was a very significant player in the British economy. That is no longer the case, and that's as a direct consequence of the neoliberal agenda that Tony Blair and Margaret Thatcher foisted upon the country. Although I think it does actually go back a little bit further than the election of Margaret Thatcher. I think the rot really started after Harold Wilson stepped down as Prime Minister in 1976, and Dennis Healey went to the International Monetary Fund that year for a loan which was never fully drawn down, was never needed, and he subsequently admitted that it was the wrong thing to do. So we've really been let down, I think, by the political class in this country, and therefore I think rather than more of the same, essentially, is all that Tony Blair is offering, what we should be doing is really investing in the economy, investing in our public services. A big uplift in social security benefits as well are absolutely essential, not just to lift the living standards of the people who are languishing on very low social security payments, but that would also help, I think, to grow the economy as well. What I would like to see, and I think what is desperately needed, and the only way in which we're going to get out of this malaise, is if indeed we have an interventionist government that does invest in the economy, that does support our public services, and everybody benefits from that. We are supposed to be the fifth biggest economy in the world, aren't we, Basil? And yet, we've got public services which are in meltdown. Our infrastructure is falling to pieces, and it's certainly not commensurate with a country whose economy is, as I say, the fifth biggest. In a way, I think what I would like to see is a sort of embracing the approach that the Luddites did all those years ago, because they weren't against technology. What they said was that new technology should be our servant, not our master. So I think what we want to see, if we're talking about AI, is to make sure that the benefits of that are actually shared amongst the populace at large, rather than being snaffled as it is at the moment. All the kind of benefits of new technology seem to be in large measure snaffled up by super rich elites, and it's completely unacceptable. And so I say we need a completely new approach, rather than reheating the sort of neoliberal agenda that Tony Blair was so keen on preserving after he came to power in 1997, and said his job wasn't to tear down what Margaret Thatcher had done, but to actually build on her achievements.
We had a commonwealth following the execution of Charles I 300 years ago. Perhaps we'll have a commonly shared wealth after the reign of Charles III. It was indeed Thatcher, the shopkeeper's daughter, who brought in that kind of, frankly, idiotic understanding of economics, attempting to run the British economy like a corner shop. And it seems Rachel Reeves is determined to do the same. But government macroeconomics doesn't work in the same way as a pocketbook, does it, Chris? Why have we abandoned the Keynesianism that brought us prosperity in the later part of the 20th century?
Well, I think it's a fundamental misunderstanding from the likes of Rachel Reeves, whether deliberate or otherwise. But the economy doesn't run like a household, and I think it's important that we recognise that people understand that austerity and all the problems that we're experiencing are a political choice. As to why we abandoned Keynesianism in the 1970s, I mean, look, there was a lot of opposition to Keynesianism right from the get-go. The likes of Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek, they were the kind of godfathers of neoliberalism. They were seen as completely off the wall, but they were fighting a sort of a rearguard action, and I don't think Keynesianism was ever fully properly embraced in the way in which Keynes sort of set out in the first instance, but by large measure that did inform, I think, governments across the West. I think it was Richard Nixon actually, or was one of the American presidents anyway, who said we're all Keynesians now. But of course, the oil price shock that occurred in the 1970s gave the opportunity, I think, to those kind of neoliberals to say, well, look, and it was completely a false argument, but they used the argument to say, well, look, Keynesianism isn't working. We had higher inflation, and this was all down to the big increase in oil prices. But if the government had been more interventionist, of course, we could have gone over that problem. The government should have intervened and subsidised the cost of the rising cost of energy for business and consumers. They have the ability to do that because we have been a floating fiat currency ever since 1971, when the so-called Bretton Woods Agreement was abandoned by Richard Nixon, which was an agreement that was thrashed out at the end of the Second World War, and basically linked to currencies like pound sterling to the dollar, and then in turn the dollar was linked to the value of gold. But that was a very effective and seductive argument that the neoliberals, the right wingers, and everybody who didn't really support the sort of post-war consensus, and they sort of seized on that. It was made easier for them, though, as I've said, because of what Dennis Healey did in 1976 when he went to the International Monetary Fund on a false premise. And I think it was borrowed something like $3.9 billion. I mean, there was an attack on the pound sterling, and that's what he was concerned about. He did subsequently admit he'd made a mistake. It was wrong. He was badly advised by his advisors. But there were other alternatives that were available to the government. They just chose not to do them. And I think some people take the view that people like Healey and Callaghan, after he took over from Harold Wilson, were somewhat bedazzled by monetarism and were looking for a way of actually implementing and moving away from the Keynesian approach and embracing monetarism. Whether that was their motivation or not, I don't know. What they did do, though, of course, by taking that loan, in exchange, the IMF insisted on significant austerity measures and so on, and that led directly to the industrial disputes of the late 1970s and the winter of 78-79, which was dubbed by the corporate media as the winter of discontent. And that gave Thatcher a real sort of political boost, as it were, and an opportunity to make political capital out of that, and certainly helped her into government. And then she sort of turbocharged the agenda that Callaghan and Healey and that Labour government had been pursuing. And then, of course, when Tony Blair came to power in 1997, as I think I was saying earlier, he said his job wasn't to tear down what Thatcher did, but to build on her achievements. So we've been saddled with this flawed economic agenda, which has played havoc, frankly, hasn't it, with the standard of living, the quality of life for ordinary working class people. I think back to my own experience as a working class kid, growing up in the 60s and 70s, leaving school with no qualifications in 1972, working in a factory and then in the building trade. And, I've often shared this anecdote that just as a 19-year-old apprentice bricklayer with my girlfriend who went on to become my wife, and she just worked as a telephonist for the city council. And we saved up for about a year. It seemed a long time when we'd seen it, just saving up for a year and going out to the discos or one thing and another. But we saved up and we were able to buy a brand new 3-bedroom desirable property backing onto a waterfront. It's unthinkable now.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's less than 3 times what I was earning as an apprentice. And I looked actually at some figures on Zoopla back a few years ago now, actually. But that property that I purchased for £10,000 in 1976 had just been sold in, I think it was about 2014 or 2015, had just been sold for well over £300,000, well beyond the capacity of the equivalent young apprentice bricklayer in 2014 or 15, whatever it was, to buy that property, to aspire to buy that property. We'd sort of return to the sort of thing that my dad, when he was working in the building trade, used to build these properties, but was never able to aspire to own one.
Chris, the lie of trickle-down economics, of course, one of the new mythology, I would say, of lies that infect our political system. And another one, of course, is that the Labour Party was beset by an anti-Semitism crisis in the Corbyn era. And you were a victim of that particular lie yourself. Now, I was very surprised to see Tim Llewellyn writing in the Electronic Intifada this week, pointing out just how egregious these lies have become. A lie has entered the political language most people use. And he was reviewing a book, Killing Corbynism, which has come out recently, which details how Rebecca Gordon-Nesbitt indicates the Zionist regime helped to defeat Corbyn in his attempts to become Prime Minister, bringing a human rights protective British government to power. It never happened, did it, Chris? As well, you know. Unfortunately, we've got to leave it there. But Patrick, I know as a follow-on to this, you've got a question you'd like to ask Chris about the attack on his Palestine declassified program.
But only briefly. But Chris, wanted to ask you any update or news about the targeting of your program, Palestine Declassified. What exactly happened, and will you be fighting this challenge? Give us an update.
Yes, I mean, what happened was that the studio that we used to record Palestine Declassified was targeted by the Home Office. There was an unsigned, as it happened, letter from the Home Office threatening to invoke the National Security Act because they were hosting Palestine Declassified. And Palestine Declassified, as you probably know, is hosted by Press TV. I mean, they sort of show the program on their channel. Press TV is an Iranian broadcasting company. It was on that basis that they were targeted, but they were threatening up to 5 years in prison. For having the temerity to host our program. So we've lost access to that studio now, but we have fallback. Back. And we are continuing to produce the program. It's a slightly different format now. But so we're doing it kind of remotely, we're just going to continue as long as we can. I think it's really important that we get the truth out about what's happening in Palestine. We get the truth out about the reality of Zionism, the reality of the Zionist regime, and the reality actually of the influence that the Zionists, that Israel wields over Great Britain, over British public life. Their influence in Parliament, their influence in the media and industry, in the music industry as well, for example, is very, very significant. And a lot of people, more people are waking up to that fact, but still a lot of people are not aware. And one of the things, obviously, that we do on Palestine Declassified is to expose this. And this is what they cannot accept, and that's why they've tried to close us down. But they haven't succeeded. We are carrying on.
Appreciate that, Chris, and keep up the great work. We'll be keeping an eye on that situation, absolutely, and looking forward to your content. You can follow still Palestine Declassified on their various channels on social media, including the Telegram channel, which I also subscribe to myself.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Basil. Patrick, let's move on then, and we'll talk about Israel for a second.
Well, let's look at the latest here. Some people are not happy. Oh, my goodness. Israel's furious over the inclusion on the UN sex violence list. If you can just imagine, Israel denounces the UN move as a, quote, blood libel and are severing ties with UN chief Antonio Guterres. So here is the story, Jerusalem Post. UN adds Israeli entities to the blacklist of countries that commit systematic sexual violence here. And, the source for this, Mike, is not only UN human rights agencies, this is also Israeli human rights agencies like B'Tselem and others, as well as a whole host of other well-established international organizations that monitor such things. These egregious violations of human rights and mass rape in the prison system. This has all been documented in the Israeli media itself over the years. So how on earth could this be a blood libel? Well, I don't know. Let's ask Danny Danon. This is Israel's UN ambassador. This is quite an interesting sort of little speech here. I don't know how to describe this, but go ahead and roll it.
The decision to blacklist Israel and accuse us of using sexual violence as a weapon of war is an outrageous decision. The Secretary General and his team continue to spread lies against Israel, to put us and Hamas terrorists on the same list. That's unacceptable. We are a strong democracy. We invited the representatives of the UN to come to Israel to check those ridiculous allegations. They chose not to come. They chose to continue with the campaign against Israel. We saw the lies in the New York Times, and now we see another lie coming from the UN. We are done with this Secretary General.
So again, anybody that points out that they're committing genocide or points out all these egregious systematic violations of human rights, sexual abuse, and so forth, they're all guilty of a blood libel, I guess. So how's that possible that 12 international agencies are simultaneously conspiring to blood libel the poor Israelis? I mean, it's just kind of ridiculous at this point. So they're going into hyperdrive on their public relations here. Now, I also want to show, these are scenes right now we'll bring up on screen. This is the ancient city of Tyre in South Lebanon. The Israelis have been bombing. This is a UNESCO protected World Heritage Site, many parts of this city. Tyre, just open your Bible if you want to know what Tyre is. Or you can go back to Alexander the Great or further back to the Egyptians. Why is Israel targeting all of these historic sites in the Levant? That's another question. They've also issued an evacuation order. I find that to be just unbelievable. This is a city I know well. I've spent time there. I even lectured at one of the universities there briefly. So it's a place that is very near and dear to my heart, but so many other people around the world. This is part of World Heritage. Why is Israel targeting it? And we're going to go here to the next one, and this is Beaufort Castle. Again, a major protected global heritage site here. This is a famous Crusader castle that occupies the high ground, very overlooking the Litani River. Again, Beaufort Castle. This is in South Lebanon here, and as I've stood on that castle, and you can see the occupied Palestine as on your eyesight on the eye line on that. So why Israel's now bombing this? This is one of the best preserved Crusader castles in the entire Levant. So it's an important part of history, something the Lebanese want to preserve. And of course, we should be interested in wanting to preserve it. Israel, on the other hand, wants to bomb it. So there's just a little update there from Lebanon. It's just, it's quite frankly unbelievable what's happening.
Basil, let's come back to you then, and we'll finish the program with some more in case you missed it.
Yes, thanks, Mike. A few choice moments over the last week. First of all, this tweet was taken down very rapidly by AIPAC. Congressman Massey's defeat on Tuesday sets a clear precedent. Elected officials are free to disagree with us, but only briefly. And that explicit threat to destroy any American politician who dares go against the most extreme Israeli government in history, well, you'll get destroyed by fair means or foul, just like Thomas Massey. Next up, 500 people seriously injured in e-scooter collisions in Great Britain last year. 10 people, all of whom were e-scooter riders, were killed compared with 6 in 2024. They are extremely dangerous things. All I can tell you is that I'm more likely to ride the winner of the Derby next Saturday than be found atop an e-scooter. Next up, here's the next story, in case you missed it this week. The Greens, I did mention this earlier, the Greens are running a scaled-back campaign in the Makerfield by-election in a boost for Burnham. Believe it or not, they think Andy Burnham is on the same page as themselves. Well, that remains to be seen. Various people have been contacting Burnham, asking him to explicitly denounce the genocide in Gaza, something he has yet to do. But there'll be no repeat, it would appear, of the Gorton by-election for the Greens. They're giving Andy Burnham a fair run. Next up, a cartoon illustrating what we all know. Benjamin Netanyahu remonstrating there with Donald Trump. I said no ceasefire, Donald. Go to your room without your McDonald's. You're grounded. As we all know, or should do by now, the United States, Pakistan was on the verge of securing a lasting peace deal with Iran, one that would have also stopped the slaughter and destruction in Lebanon as well. And the Israelis torpedoed it. They weren't having any of it. And believe it or not, in that campaign, they were backed up by numerous Democrats on Capitol Hill as well, believe it or not. The war party still very much entrenched in Washington. And the last one from me, this is Martin Samuel in the Times. cold comfort for you, but my house has air conditioning. Mine doesn't. That's why I'm in a short sleeve shirt today, gentlemen. But finally this week, it's back to you, Patrick, and how to save Donald Trump.
That's right, Basil. And, just to round out all that depressing news, it's time for a feel-good story. And we don't have to look, we had to look quite far to find one. So far, Bangladesh, Bengali minister saves Donald Trump from a ritual sacrifice. Believe it or not, this is completely a true story. Interior Minister Salahuddin Ahmed stepped in after a blonde-quiffed albino,
whichever,
we're in Britain, albino buffalo sporting the U.S. president's trademark hair weave became a viral sensation. The albino buffalo in Bangladesh, affectionately nicknamed Donald Trump because of his blonde tuft and his resemblance to the U.S. president, spared from sacrifice during the Muslim festival of Eid, and a last-minute government intervention here. The rescue was reported on Wednesday by multiple outlets. The Home Minister from Bangladesh ordered the officials stop the sacrifice, refund the buyer of this cow, and relocate the animal. We've got the clip here, and just notice the resemblance. It's uncanny. Roll it.
So you're promising me that's not a wig?
Look, just to be sure, unlike the U.S. president, that is a completely natural quiff on top of that cow. It's not a hair weave but is actually real. So if Home Affairs said, we have been told the price of the buffalo will be paid, or an animal of similar value will be given for sacrifice. The only problem is, Mike, everybody in Bangladesh wants this cow. Now, this cow is super famous in Bangladesh. But what's funny is just a few miles over the border in India, that is absolutely illegal to even talk about killing a cow, or a buffalo in this case. Yeah. But wow, incredible. The albino Bengali buffalo that resembles the U.S. president, he has been spared.
Glad to hear it.
That's something to go into the weekend with, isn't it?
Absolutely. That should put a smile on everyone's faces for the weekend. I'm going to say thank you very much to Chris Williamson for joining us today, Basil and Patrick, and thanks for everybody that's watching. We'll be here in a couple of minutes if you're a UK Column member for some UK Column News Extra. Otherwise, don't forget the interviews tonight. Have a great weekend. We will see you at 1 p.m. as usual on Monday.